Hello, everyone. Hi, Facebook. I hope you're doing well today, this Thursday. It is time for Bible Study Live with sisters, Connie, friends, all the people. So, right now, it's my sweet sister, Gina. You can't see her yet, but you will. She's in a little box above me. So, today we are continuing our study of reaping and sowing. And today we're talking about the good and the bad, or the bad and the good. We're going to start with the bad before we get to the good. So, because isn't it nice to end with something positive? So we're going to start with the bad. It's actually, there's so many messages in this particular passage that it's one of my favorites for multiple reasons. But today we're going to use it to talk about reaping and sowing. We're going to look at Acts chapter 5, starting at verse 1. This is the story of Ananias and Sapphira. We've read about them many times. We're going to read about them again tonight. Now, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. I'll mention also, it says, because in chapter 4 of Acts, they're talking about how all the believers are sharing their possessions. In verse 32 of Acts 4, it says, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. And then it says later in verse 34 that there were no needy persons among them, for from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. So from time to time, not required, not all the time, but from time to time. So that's why when it says, now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. I want to also talk about a piece of property. I'm not a landowner. I haven't ever bought a house. I would love to maybe at one point. I have not done it. But when people say they sold a piece of property, they're not talking about the home they typically live in. That means they've got multiple pieces of property. They sold one. They sold a piece of property. Or maybe they've got multiple acres and they sell off some of the acres. It's not like they're, selling their bed out from under themselves. That's important to know too. So, verse 2, with his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a moment. Here's the thing. He didn't have to sell the property. It wasn't required. Nobody was requiring that. It just said from time to time, some people did. He obviously had extra stuff and sold it. Now, I don't know what he actually said, but the implication, because it doesn't give us his words, but the implication is he somehow communicated, I sold the house for this much money, here you go. He somehow communicated that, because look at verse 3. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied just to human beings, but to God. Now, that's up through verse 4. It's just verses 1 through 4. We already got drama going on. You can tell he lied. So he must have somehow said, communicated something, probably bragging with arrogance. I sold my, 4-bedroom house for you and got $1 million. Here you go. But really, he sold it and maybe got 2 million or 1.5 million or whatever it was. Whatever it was, it says he lied, not just to humans, but to God. There's so many sins and issues wrapped in here. There's arrogance, there's false humility, misrepresentation, straight out lies. Like there's so many pieces in there that make it it's like when somebody says, imagine I gave $20 to the homeless today, but really they had only given five. As though that would make them look like a better person because they said 20. But let's say you had the gift of discernment, as Peter did, and you knew they didn't give $20, they gave five. Why would they? They didn't have to say anything. They didn't have to give anything. They didn't have to do anything. They could have kept their money in there. They could have sold it and kept their money in their pocket. They didn't have to do anything. Like you said, after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? Like that's your money. You could sell it and keep the, like that's not, keep your own money. But instead, no, I got to look like something and come in here and tell people, look, I have sold property like all these other good people, and I am giving you all the money I've gotten from selling that property. He lied. He lied. And there are times there are times when God's like, that, and that's the end of it. Like you don't even get a do-over. Like here's one of those times he got no do-over. Oh, can I say that was 75? He didn't have any of that. He didn't, what happened? He didn't have any of that. It says, when he heard this, after Peter said what he said, when Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. Period. Point blank. Done. And great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? Because clearly he knew the price that Ananias had said. Now she could have said, no, we kept 75,000 of that back. That's not the full price. She could have done that. Nope. Yes, she said, that is the price. She could have said, I don't know. Although if she really knew, then they still would have scoped out a lie. But let's say she didn't know. She could have said, I don't know. I was just looking for my husband. But she did know. She knew that they sold it for whatever price and that the story was going to be, we're going to tell them we sold it for X, but really we sold it for X plus Y, but we're going to keep Y at home. They were both in cahoots doing the thing. So she says, yes, that's the price. Peter said to her, how? You conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord. Sin. The feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in and, finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. That was Acts chapter 5, 1 through 11, talking about the good and the bad of the reaping and sowing. It's interesting. On the one hand, they could have given whatever they wanted to give. They didn't have to lie about it. They could have just given. They were supposedly, they took away whatever benefits they had by trying to sow a good seed. They didn't sow a good seed. They didn't sow a generous seed. They lied and said and pretended as though they were being more generous than they were, and didn't even have to do that. It was their money. It was their land. They could have just been like, you know what, sold this for 100,000. We're giving you 75,000. They could have just said it, or whatever it is. Sold this for however many camels and a horse, and we're gonna keep the horse, like it, whatever. But they lied, and the result of them lying was immediate. They sowed lies, deception, arrogance, misinformation. They reaped. Boom. And what they reaped was unfortunate to me. I mean, it was death. It was immediate, and it was bigger than, I mean, many. I'll put us all in there. Many of us will say something that is not fully true. Either it's a lie by omission, or trying not to hurt somebody's feelings, wanting to make ourselves look a little better than oh well, I gotta whatever, like something. We want to make it seem like we are more than we are. It can happen all the time. Imagine if how we got dealt with was like how Ananias and Sapphira got dealt with. If it was just a meet, people would they either this earth would be mighty empty, or people would straighten up real fast. And I don't know which it would be. I don't know which it would be. Now, here's what's interesting. They were killed because they lied. Let's take a look at Joshua 2. Here's another. This is reaping and sowing as well. And this is one of those things where, people try to have an understanding of what does this mean in the scripture. And Ananias and Sapphira died because they lied. But here's a situation in Joshua 2 where there's also lying going on, but it's lying to protect someone. And the result of that is different. So let's read Joshua 2. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, this part is true. Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. I don't know if that part is true or not. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So she straight lied. She lied. She lied to the king of Jericho. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Now, that was chapter 2 of Joshua. I'll finish that story with just these two verses from Joshua chapter 6. It's verses 24 and 25, or 23 and 24. So I think it's 23 and 24. Nope, not that either. What did I write down? I must have gotten distracted. So it's actually 22 and 23, it looks like. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. And then 24 and 25. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. So it's Joshua 6, 22 through 25. That's what I read. So, okay. She reaped mercy for them. No, she sowed mercy for them, to them, hid them, and she received mercy. She reaped mercy when they came in. We can get into the whole situation of, but wait, Ananias and Sapphira lied and they died. Have lied to the king and people, and she lived because she was having mercy on those who had spied out the land. I don't know. Think um I can't even say if you're lying. Her lie was not for her personal gain, because it was as well. She wanted to make sure she got to live when everybody else was going to get killed. I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I can say from the sowing, she sowed mercy. She could have blown the whistle and gotten favor with the king, but she would have died later. Not then, but later. She didn't do that. She showed them mercy, and then when they came and took over the land, everybody else got gone, and she and her family got to live. That's what happened. Uh, That's what I can say is that's what happened. She sowed mercy and she received mercy. She reaped mercy, but she also lied and wasn't struck down like Ananias and Sapphira were for their lie. So we'll have to do another study on that, because that's one of those things where we try to understand it and our minds are too small to be wrapped around it. I can't. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for that. I'll bring my sisters on in a moment to give me their thoughts. In the meantime, let me read this last thing to you. And I was just telling Gina when she came on, I do like Snopes. I check Snopes periodically, and Snopes will, debunk something. This wasn't true. This really did happen. Here's the facts here, blah, blah, blah. Every now and then. And I mean, and I know humans write Snopes and they have the research that they have to try to figure it out, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're getting everything correct. And I will say this, Alex, I'm going to read this story to you. I'm going to tell you what Snopes said, and then I'm going to tell you my feelings about what Snopes said. So here's the story. It says, imagine a humble Scottish farmer named Fleming toiling away on his farm when suddenly piercing screams shatter the tranquility. Without a second thought, he abandons his tools and races towards the distress. What he finds is a child struggling in the swamp, trapped and drowning. With no hesitation, Fleming risks his own life using a long branch to pull the child to safety. The very next day, a luxurious car pulls up to the Flemings' modest home. Out steps a distinguished gentleman, Randolph Churchill, the father of the boy Fleming saved. Churchill offers to repay the farmer's bravery with riches, but Fleming refuses, saying, "Saving someone is my duty. Humanity has no price." Just then, Fleming's own son appears at the door. Churchill, intrigued, asks, "Is this your son?" When Fleming proudly confirms, Churchill proposes an intriguing deal. If Fleming won't accept his money, he'll fund the boy's education at the finest schools, ensuring he gets the same opportunity as Churchill's own child. Fleming, realizing the chance to give a son a future he could never afford, gratefully accepts. His son goes on to attend St. Mary's Medical School in London and becomes Sir Alexander Fleming, the inventor of penicillin. That is true. That did happen. That part for sure happened. But here's where the story comes full circle. Years later, it is penicillin that saves the life of Winston Churchill, Randolph's son, who would become the Prime Minister of Britain twice. Isn't it fascinating how a single act of kindness can ripple through history, connecting lives in such unexpected ways? Now, I love the story, true or not. You look it up in Snopes, they say it's false. It's a myth. It's been going around for years, never happened. They weren't in the same place. This didn't happen. That's not how Fleming, he didn't even know he wanted to go to medical school then. What I read didn't say, like, I guess some version of the story said, "Oh, great, I can send my son to medical school." This didn't say that, but in their refuting of it, they said that Snopes said, that he didn't even know he wanted to go to medical school. He'd gone to the military and did something else, and then did something with his brother's medical practice, something. It goes on and on. Here's the only reason that I was like, they said that in 1946, y'all, I mean, think of how many years that is. In 1946, Churchill's historic whatever site refuted, or they were quoted saying this never happened. And then they linked to it. So you can go look for yourself. But that quote's not there. This story's not there on the site that they linked to prove that it never happened. I'm thinking, you go back to 1946, and already then people were talking about the story. Like, I don't know what was going on back then, but we didn't have the internet back then, y'all. We didn't have like the wild kind of, putting out a meme and putting Abraham Lincoln's name on it kind of. We didn't have that kind of stuff going on. So I will say this though, regardless of whether or not the story is true, and we don't really know, and I get that, blah, 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 blah. I still like the story, and I still know that our lives are intertwined. I know that we sow seeds, and it might not even be us that reaps them. It might be our children's children. Like even with Rahab, her family got to reap a seed they didn't sow because of what she did with mercy. Um, and I'm assuming Ananias and Sapphira had no children, but if they did, they unfortunately, were affected by the loss of their parents. So I still like the story of Fleming and Churchill, whether it's true or not. I think it's interesting that they say that they denied it back in 1946, and I don't find a legitimate statement of their denial. That's fine. I'm not here to dispute Snopes. I'm just saying I like the story. I like this story of reaping and sowing, and it just so happened to pop up in my feed this morning. So I decided, since this is the message and the theme this month, it made sense to include it. So I included it. So that's what I have to share. And now I'm going to bring my sisters to the screen. I know Gina, she's already researching. What'd you find, Gina? What are you thinking over there? What are you looking at?
I haven't found anything yet. I was looking, but I'm going to keep looking.
I like it anyway. So that's how I feel about it. Bria, I miss you. Good to see you. I like your braids.
Sorry, I had to leave early last week, I think it was. But yes, I'm back.
You're back. Back and looking beautiful. Anyway, your thoughts about tonight's message, ladies?
I was gonna say I really like Oh gosh, I like the topic of sowing and reaping. I don't remember if you ever got to meet Amoye um
Hmm.
much, but like she just really good at just different concepts, different kind of themes and key themes like in the Bible, things like that. She just enjoys those things and like so we talked about that a lot. And this theme in the Bible of what you reap, what you sow, and what that looks like in so many different ways. So I didn't catch everything, but um I don't know. There were just some things lately that I was thinking about in regard to this. So it's good to think about this in different ways and even just like Cain and Abel and like I can't I was reading some other like very like things that happened with the ground, that were paralleled those things or like things that happened in Genesis where they like the act of putting blood into the ground was avoided, for different reasons, but how like, sowing blood into like what God actually said would bring life and these different things and that he created things out of how big of a deal that was. And like Amoy and I used to talk about, man, like you just don't know like what could happen with the things that you do or you say or that you put your money into or whatever it is because a man reaps what he sows and we don't always know what that looks like. It's not always like a plus b equals c kind of situation or that you even see it in your lifetime a result of what you're doing behind closed doors or in front of people. But that law of sowing and reaping also just in a positive way that like there are positive things that can happen as a result of reaping. I mean, of sowing good things. And I may not get a chance to reap that harvest, but two generations down from me, or the people sitting in this room 500 years from now will reap from prayers I prayed or whatever, it is. So it's interesting.
It is really interesting. What you just said reminded me of that story that also some people have tried to debunk, but then they realize they can't because they have some legitimacy about the roof at Oxford and what it was made out of. Like it was a special oak or whatever, and when something happened and that roof like collapsed or whatever it was, there was an issue with the roof, whether it was fire, whatever. They're like, um, how are we gonna replace this roof? But when they built the whatever it was in Oxford, they planted a seed right then for that oak tree because they knew at some point this is going to need to be replaced. So they planted the seed right then. So the tree already existed for them to be able to use it for the roof. And thinking about that, that was like 500 years later. But when they they built it with the knowledge that at some point it might be 100 years from now or however many years from now they're going to need um you know wood for this, so we got to plant a tree right now so at that point it'll be ready. And that we don't even, honestly, it's such an immediate society, we don't even give that kind of thought most of the time, like especially in American culture. We just don't think that way. We don't think we should. We should think, what's this going to look like 500 years from now? Or what are we doing for our next generation and generation after that? But often it's like, at most, you're thinking about your children and maybe your grandchildren, and maybe a couple of people are doing their great grandchildren. For things like land, they do think a little bit more like we want to make sure we keep this land in the family. But in general, most choices people are making, they're making right now choices, personal gratification, immediate gratification, and that's it. Not even thinking about sowing a seed that's, like you said, is going to be might outlive you, and that's really what it should be about. But
This is
anyway,
gonna sound silly, but I love Hallmark and I've watched there's a lot of good clean movies, I'm not getting paid to say this, but it's nice. And I was watching one where this woman, for all she knew, she was just American, and she wanted to like she had this interior design business and they were wanting to like secure a building or whatever, and she was just using all the money she had for it. Then she gets this timely call, as they do in these movies, and oh, turns out that she's like the person that's getting left her, like, I don't know, great uncle or something's like estate in like England. And she immediately asks the guy, she's like, "Oh my gosh, how quickly could I sell it?" The guy the guy on the other end of the phone was like, "Did I hear her? Like, what in the world?" Because like he was like, "This estate has been in your family for hundreds of generations. What is happening?" But all her mind was about was like, "Okay, how quick can I get out there and just sell this thing?" And as all good Hallmark movies, of course, she didn't decide to do that eventually, but it was just like, that's the kind of things that we're after now. Like, I think about, I don't, for some reason it convicted me, even though it wasn't, there wasn't anything they were really trying to say, but I was like, oh my goodness, like what kind of things do I feel that way about? Like in that's being passed down to me, or, in different ways, and like that you so all of a sudden just gonna uproot things, or I feel like you have to have a better reason to sow that kind of thing, make that kind of change, and those things do matter, like there's a lot of that physical and spiritual parallel, and this law of sowing and reaping is spiritual law that we see, is true over and over again.
Yeah. And I'm a Hallmark girl too, so it's all good.
I
We're
love
right
Hallmark.
there on that, Bria. What'd you say,
I
Jean?
love, I love Hallmark movies. So I was wondering if the difference, obviously both people lied in the two stories that you read. But I was wondering if the difference was in the motive to serve God or not. I think she recognized who God was and who was serving God, and was like, I don't know what they're cutting up and doing over here. Clearly they were doing something that made God say, just go take that whole situation. Just go, just it's all jacked up. Um, so her intent was to serve, and obviously the first crew, I mean, they both lied to men, but Peter very clearly said, you didn't just lie to men, you lied to the Holy Spirit. And so the actual act was the same, I think, but the motivation behind it was very different. And I have to think that God recognizes that. So
That's a good point. I do like that point. That would make sense. Because she did. She was like, we know that the God you serve is God in heaven and on earth. Like she broke it
yeah,
down like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And we got, like I said, we got fully May over here clowning. I almost liken it to if America was under leadership by somebody who we knew was not correct, I mean, and someone whose decisions harmed us to the point where I can't even save my fellow country people. All I can do is try to make a way for my people to be safe, because they're doing the wrong thing. They're serving the wrong God. They're doing. So I mean, there was some personal gain there, but it was still in recognition of God. God is God. How do I, let me at least, somebody here knows. Can you. So I do see a difference, obviously, and like you said, and there's you talk about how many sins they hit on with that action, and so many sins, right? There's pride and greed, right? The sin of greed, which they probably didn't need that money. But they talk about how hard it is for rich people, not that money's evil, but rich people, somebody just said earlier this week, rich people are rich for a reason, right? They're not coming up off of it. They're not, they're not looking to help some of them, a lot of them. And they certainly aren't looking to give till it hurts. So anyway, that's what I got out of it. Was, same action,
Yeah.
totally different motivation.
Totally different motivation. When you said that, I was thinking about I mean, we don't know how many lies Ananias and Sapphira told, because I'm thinking about who was living on the land that they sold? Like, did they evict somebody? Like, we gotta help people over here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how deep did the lie go? It could have been, bad, bad.
Well, they certainly showed their character. So you can only imagine that it was turtles all the way down. I mean, it was bad. Because you don't just get up in the morning and say, here, we're going to do this thing. And then your wife goes, yeah. You know what I mean? But she was like,
Right.
yeah.
Mm, mm, mm. Anyway, you didn't find any more debunking of Fleming and Churchill?
I have to look into that a little bit.
Okay. All right. Well, let me know. Personally, just
Story.
let me know, because I'm always curious. But like I said, I figure it popped up in my feed today for a reason. So we're talking about reaping and sowing and reaping, and here it is. So, but I will say, I was not there. I can't swear to its legitimacy, but I do like the story. And there is also a site that says it's not true. They debunk it. They say it's a myth, but the what they refer to as kind of proof of it being fake doesn't mention the story at all on that site. I looked in there, frequently asked questions and about and all the things, and I'm like, they don't say anything over here about Fleming and Churchill. I couldn't find a statement when I searched for one based on what they said. Supposedly there was a statement back in 1946 of all things, but I also just found it so interesting that that this story, I mean, that's like a full almost 80 years, right? That this story has been around, 78 years it's been around. And so that if they really, like, if it had gotten that widely, whatever, they had to put out a statement saying it's not true back in 1946. I don't know, that I find that to be interesting. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. It looks like there were some differences. Um, it looks like there are some other sites that talk about why it's not true, um, but some things are the if even if every detail of the story isn't true, the point of the story is true. So, and that's why these things endure, right? Because there's the meaning is true. And the
Yeah,
message is.
it does. I mean, this is a weird story to get started back then. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a
Yeah,
weird
I'm looking
it's
at
just interesting.
why it might have started.
Who might have?
Well, they were saying it was published a year after Churchill was stricken with pneumonia. So I'm just, they do talk about some issues with the timing and why it didn't really work, but or why it wouldn't have worked. But honestly, it really doesn't matter whether it's true. It's the concept of our decisions having far-reaching consequences and doing the right thing to do the right thing. That's all
Because it's
true.
the right thing to do. Just period. Yeah, I know. And there are things that we know happened and were true, that people that are history and passed down, and we know. And if you ask certain people, they'll say it didn't happen. And I mean, we know that's true. And then once they start looking at the history from basically 2000, 2016 to now, oh man, with people talking about fake news and alternate facts, I can only imagine what history books are going to look like 20 years from now, or 30 or 50 years from now, and people are trying to sort out what was actually true. It's going
Yeah,
to be tricky.
it's gonna be.
Even people talking about, what is it? Is it Park City? Is it Park City, or you've one of them that they said didn't happen? The guy who said it didn't happen, people are grieving the loss of their children, and they're like, yeah, fake news. They're like, what is wrong with you? And they sued him and won. They're like, what is wrong with you? And yet, what are the history books going to say about that time? So then you take a story like this that came up right around, like, I don't know who started it, or why, or if it's really not true, or if it really is true. I don't know. But it is interesting that even back then, it immediately got, traction and whatnot. So I don't know. But like you said, the meaning is kind. If it was cruel, then we could say we don't want to believe that. That's fine. But in this situation, it is a wonderful um, story of generational sowing and reaping. So anyway, that is it for tonight. We have two more reaping and sowing episodes. Do you want to do one, Bria? You are welcome to do one either on the 22nd or the 29th if you'll be around. Give it some thought and let me know. So we're going to say bye, Facebook, bye, Facebook, bye, Facebook.
By Facebook.